left to go mad in a locked lighthouse. A Lakota chief climbed the stairs and gave her mine back. The lock was on the outside of the door. That was the first thing I noticed. Not the smell, salt and something fouler, and not the sound, which I will get to. The lock. A heavy iron bar dropped into its bracket from the outside. Which means whoever put it there did not want her to leave. They were not locking the world out. They were locking her in. I stood at the base of that lighthouse for a long time before I climbed. Let me go back. Not far back, just to the morning, because that is where it started for me. The day I first heard about the woman in the lighthouse. I had come down from the hills. This was the autumn, the second autumn, after my wife stands looking past, which made it a hard season to be anywhere. And I had ridden to the settlement at Grey Rock Bay to trade. We needed iron. Winter was coming in a way you could smell before you could see, wet, cold, and heavy off the Pacific. And I had a few hides and a decision to make about whether to spend the rest of the season at the coast or ride back up to the plateau where my people were wintering. I was leaning toward the plateau. The Bay settlement, and I had a complicated history, is another way of saying some men there would rather I didn't exist. And I had gotten old enough that avoiding their faces seemed like wisdom rather than retreat. The trading post was run by a man named Aldous Fenn, was one of the few white men at Grey Rock I trust, which means I had once watched him refuse to lie, even when lying would have cost him nothing, and that is a rare enough thing that I noted it and remembered it. Fenn had a broad red face and hands like flat irons, and he didn't fill silence with noise, which I appreciated. We traded. I got what I needed. And then, when I was tying the iron onto my pack horse, he came out of the post and stood beside me and said quietly, the way a man says something he has been holding for a while, "You hear about the woman they've got locked up in the lighthouse?" I looked at him. "The Hargrove Lighthouse," he said. "Out on Sorrow Point." I knew the lighthouse. Everyone on the coast knew it. A tall white tower on a finger of rock half a mile out from shore, connected to the land by a narrow path that got swallowed by the tide twice a day. It had been built 8 or 9 years earlier by a shipping company, and for a while a keeper named Hargrove had tended it, and then Hargrove had died, and his son had taken it over. And then the son had left or vanished. No one quite knew, and the light had gone dark for a season, and the bay had gone nervous because of the rocks. "What woman?" I said. Fenn rubbed the back of his neck. "Name's Clara Hargrove. Daughter-in-law, married the son. When he cleared out, she refused to leave. Went." He paused, searching for a word that wouldn't shame anyone. "Strange. Stopped talking, stopped eating much, started going up to the room and sitting there all night staring at the water. Brother came up from San Francisco 2 months ago to bring her back. She wouldn't go. He said she wasn't fit to refuse. And he had a judge here." A tight pause. "A judge in somebody's pocket," signed a paper saying she lacked sound mind. Locked her in. Plans to come back in the spring with men and a carriage. I looked out toward the point. The lighthouse was too far to see from where we stood, but I knew the direction. "Who's keeping the light?" I said. "No one," Fenn said. "Brother doesn't care. Shipping company's raising hell, but the brother's got lawyers." "And the woman," I said. "She's there now alone." "Far as I know," Fenn said. "I've been out twice with food. She takes it through the little window at the base. Won't open the door. I don't know if she can open the door. I don't know if she knows the bar is down." He looked at his hands. "I'm not the law. I'm not her family. I don't know what I'm allowed to do." Shh. I knew what he was asking, or not asking. He was telling me because he didn't know what else to do with it, and because he knew me well enough to know I would not pretend I hadn't heard it. I stayed that night at the edge of the settlement, not going in, camping where the pines came down to the shingle. I thought about it. The plateau was waiting. My people were waiting. Cold was coming, and there was no particular reason for me to be at Grey Rock Bay at all. I had 100 reasons to ride north in the morning. I lay on my back and watched the sky and did not sleep much. Before first light, I rode out to Sorrow Point. The tide was low, the path was exposed, a spine of wet rock maybe 6 feet wide at its narrowest, with the sea, flat and gray on both sides of it, under the first pale light. My horse refused the path, which was sensible, so I tied him where the path began and went on foot. The lighthouse grew larger as I walked. It was tall, maybe 60 feet, with a gallery around the lamp room at the top. Stone base, white-painted tower, a small attached house at the base that was shut tight. And the sound. I heard it before I got close enough to see the door clearly. A sound like something rhythmic and deliberate, coming from above. Not screaming, not weeping. A sound more patient than that, and stranger. I will describe it as the sound a person makes when they have run out of other ways to let something out. I walked around the base first. The little window Fen had mentioned was shuttered from inside. The door, heavy wood, iron-banded, had the bar down, a bar that swung on a hinge anchored into the stone. A man had done that. A man had stood here and dropped that bar and walked away and left a woman on the other side of it. I stood there a while and let that settle. I lifted the bar. It wasn't a sudden decision. It felt more like the end of a decision I had been arriving at since I heard Fen say the word. Lighthouse. Or maybe since I lay awake looking at the stars and felt the cold coming and thought about what it meant to be locked somewhere by someone who owned the key. The door did not open easily. The wood had swelled with salt damp, and I had to put my shoulder to it. When it finally gave it, swung inward hard, and I caught it before it hit the wall. Inside was dark, except for the gray light from the open doorway, and what came faintly down from above, through the iron spiral staircase at the center. The smell was close and cold, and I will not linger on it except to say that no one should live like that, and she had been living like that for 2 months. The sound had when the door opened. I stood at the bottom of the stairs and waited. I did not call up. I did not announce myself. I just waited. Which is a thing I learned a long time ago. That the first thing most frightened people need is for someone to be still, because everything in their life has been motion and intrusion and noise. Stillness is the only thing that says, I mean to let you decide. After a while, I heard movement up above, soft, careful, then nothing, then more. I sat down on the bottom step. I was not going anywhere. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the light outside to go from gray to white. Long enough to hear the tide begin to rise along the rock outside, the little percussive slap of it against the base. I thought about Stan's looking, which I often did when I was being still in a cold place. She had been patient with me in the early years, when I was not yet fit to be patient with myself. She had sat with me through some bad winters, without asking for anything, except that I keep breathing. I thought about what she would have made of this lighthouse and this woman. And I thought she probably would have sat on the same step I was sitting on and waited the same way. I heard the woman's foot on the 3rd or 4th step above me before I saw her. She came down very slowly, stopping every few steps. I didn't look up. I kept my eyes on the open door and the strip of sea beyond it. She stopped about 8 steps up, I said, in English, not turning. Tide will come up soon. There's time to go before it does if you want to go. If you don't want to go, that's fine too. Nothing. I have food with me. I left it outside. I had, in fact, taken some dried meat and a piece of hard bread from my pack before I crossed the path. You can eat or not. A long quiet, then her voice, which was rough from disuse but not gone. Who are you? Not a question exactly. More like she was just making sure I was real. My name is Crow Stands Still, I said. I trade at Grey Rock. A man named Fen told me you were here. Another long quiet. Is my brother with you? No, I said. I came alone. I heard her sit down on the step. Not come down more, just sit. That was the first morning. I should explain something about myself before I go further, because this story does not make much sense without it. I was at that time 54 years old. I was the chief of a small band of Lakota who had been pushed west and west again until we ended up on the coast, which is not where Lakota belong. and which was its own kind of exile. I had fought when fighting was what was needed, and stopped fighting when it wasn't. I had watched men I respected die and men I didn't respect live long and comfortable lives. And I had made a kind of peace with the indifference of things, without making the mistake of calling that peace wisdom. My wife had died of a fever 2 years before. My son was grown and on the plateau with the others and didn't need me present every day. I was in the particular condition of a man who has done his work and is waiting to find out if there is more work to do. I don't say this to make myself sound noble. I say it because when I stood at the base of that lighthouse and heard that woman's sound coming down above, I wasn't moved by pity or charity or anything that had a clean name. I was moved by recognition. I knew what it sounded like when someone had been locked somewhere for too long and was running out of places to put what was in them. I knew it because I had been there once, not in a lighthouse, but somewhere. I came back the next morning, and the morning after that. Pattern was the same the first few days. I crossed the path at low tide, left food at the base, went in, sat on the step. She came partway down. We talked or didn't. I left before the tide came up and cut off the path. On the third day she came all the way to the bottom of the stairs and stood 6 feet from me, and I got my first clear look at her. She was perhaps 35, thin from not eating enough, with dark circles under her eyes and her hair loose and tangled in a way that had clearly been tended once and hadn't been tended recently. She was wearing a man's shirt and a skirt that had salt stains on the hem. Her eyes, when she looked at me, were the eyes of someone who had been watching for trick songs for a long time and was tired of it but couldn't stop. She said, "Why do you keep coming?" I said, "Because you're here." She looked at me for a long time, not a suspicious look exactly, more like she was weighing something. She said, "My brother paid a judge to say I'm mad." "I know," I said. "I'm not mad," she said. "I know," I said. Something in her face shifted. Not relief. Not yet. Just a small thing, like a knot going fractionally loose. She had probably said it a dozen times to a dozen people, and had them smile and nod the way people smile and nod when they think they're humoring someone. I didn't smile and nod. I just said I know because I did know. A person who is actually mad doesn't explain themselves with that kind of clarity. A person who is actually mad doesn't have eyes like that, eyes that are tracking you and measuring your honesty with a precision that would embarrass most men. She sat down on the floor, her back against the stone wall. I sat back down on the step, she said. "My husband left 2 years ago. I found out later he'd gone to Portland, started over. New name, new woman, eventually." She said it flatly, like reciting an inventory. "I didn't leave because this is my house. I tended this light for 2 years by myself. I know every mechanism in it. I know the rocks. Brought 3 ships safe in weather that would have put them on the reef. Nobody knows that, or they know it and don't care." She paused. "My brother said I'd gone eccentric." That's the word he used, eccentric. "Because I wouldn't come back to San Francisco and be under his roof." I nodded. "I kept the light going until 3 weeks ago," she said, "when I didn't have more oil. The company should have sent oil. They didn't, because of the legal situation." A pause. "There are rocks a quarter mile out." "I know," I said. She looked at me. "You're not going to tell me it will be all right?" "No," I said. "Or that my brother will relent?" "No." She was quiet a while. "Fen," she said finally. "He's a decent man. He brought food." A pause. "But he's afraid of the brother's lawyers." I didn't say anything to that, because there was nothing useful to say. Fen was afraid of the brother's lawyers, because Fen was a man with a trading post and a livelihood to protect, and that was the truth of it. She said, "What are you afraid of?" I thought about it. "Not much anymore," I said. That's one of the few advantages of having already lost. The things you were most afraid of losing. She looked at me for a moment, and then looked away, toward the open door and the water. "My wife died 2 years ago," I said. I don't know why I told her that then. It seemed relevant in a way I couldn't quite explain. It was more that I wanted her to know I wasn't coming from a position of having everything intact and intact. People tend to give advice from a kind, innocence that is useless to people who are broken. I wasn't intact. I had been broken and had kept going. That's different. She didn't say she was sorry. She just nodded once, the way a person nods when they recognize something. On the fifth day, she came outside. Not far. She stood in the doorway while I sat on the rocks. But she came into the air and the light. Shh. And I watched her blink at the brightness and breathe. Really, breathe the way you breathe when you've been inside too long and had forgotten what air felt like when it moved. I had brought oil, 2 tins from Fen, who had found them in the back of his store and pressed them on me without being asked. I had carried them across the path that morning and set them against the base of the lighthouse. She saw them and looked at me. "Fen?" she said. "Fen," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "If I get the light running, the brothers' lawyers can't claim abandonment. It changes the legal situation." "I thought it might," I said. She looked at the tins, then at me. Something moving behind her eyes that wasn't quite emotion yet, or not the kind she had access to. More like the beginning of a thought that had to do with the future. And she hadn't been having thoughts about the future. "You planned this," she said. "I thought about it," I said. "You could have just told me." "I could have," I said. "But you didn't know me yet." She looked at me for a long moment and then laughed. One short sound, a little rough, like something that hadn't been used recently but still worked. It was the first time I'd heard her laugh. It was a good laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere real. She let me carry the oil tins up the stairs. I am not going to pretend that what happened over the next weeks was simple or without complication, because it wasn't. The lighthouse was cold and damp, and the mechanisms needed work, and Clara Hargrove was a woman who had been through something serious and was not going through it. There were mornings when she was sharp and present, and the practical problem of the light gave her something to be herself inside of. There were other mornings when she sat at the base of the stairs and didn't move, and I sat nearby and didn't push. I learned things about her the way you learn things about a place, by spending time in it without hurry. She had been educated beyond what most women at the coast were educated, which her father had done because he believed it mattered. She knew celestial navigation. She could calculate the arc of a lens and the reach of a beam with precision that I had never seen from anyone, man or woman, and she explained it to me one evening when we were up in the lamp room, and she was explaining the mechanism, hands moving over the brass fittings with a familiarity that was half technical and half something more like affection. She had loved this work. She had been good at it. And then the world had decided that wasn't possible, that a woman alone in a lighthouse on the rocks either had to be someone's wife to be there legitimately, or someone's madwoman if she refused to leave. I thought about that a lot, about what it costs a person to be right about themselves when the world keeps insisting they're wrong. It takes a particular kind of insurance that I respected more than I had words for. My band was on the plateau. I sent word with a rider that I was staying at the coast through the early winter. My son sent back a message that was equal parts confusion and grudging trust, which was about what I expected. He had his mother's eyes and his father's stubbornness, and he was going to be fine. The brother came in November, earlier than planned, which told me something had changed. Probably that the shipping company had applied pressure, or that word had gotten back to San Francisco that the light was running again, and the legal situation was less clean than he had told his lawyers. He came with 2 men and a paper, and he rowed out onto the path at low tide. On a morning, I happened to be at the base of the lighthouse, sitting on the rocks mending a piece of harness. His name was Garrett Mentz. He was maybe 45, heavy through the shoulders, fast, well-dressed for Grey Rock, with the particular kind of confidence that comes from having had access to other people's compliance for so long that he has stopped distinguishing it from actual authority. He looked at me sitting on his sister's rocks, and his face went through several expressions before settling on contempt. "You there," he said. "You have business here?" I looked at him. "Yes," I said. "This property is under a legal." "The light is running," I said. "Has been running 6 weeks." That stopped him. He looked up at the lighthouse. He hadn't expected that. He had expected to find a dark tower and a ruined woman and a clean legal situation. "My sister," he started, "knows every mechanism in this tower," I said, "and has brought ships safe off the reef 3 times since October. You could go ask the captains. They're at Grey Rock. They know her name." He was quiet for a moment, recalculating. "Who are you to involve yourself in?" "Someone who was here," I said, "when you weren't." His men were watching me carefully, the way men do when they're trying to figure out whether what's in front of them is threat. I was not trying to be a threat. I was sitting on a rock mending harness. But I am not a small man, and I am not, by that point in my life, a man who bothers with nervousness. And I think those things together made them uncertain about the calculus. The door of the lighthouse opened. Clara had heard the voices. She stood in the doorway, upright, her hair pinned, her eyes clear. She looked at her brother with a steadiness that I would not have predicted even 2 weeks earlier, because 2 weeks earlier she had not entirely been back yet. She was back now. I had watched it happen gradually, the way ice goes out of a river, not all at once but in pieces, and then one morning the river is moving again. "Garrett," she said. He looked at her with something that was more complicated than contempt. There was something else in it, some other layer, but I didn't spend much time reading his face. I was watching hers. "Clara," he said. His voice had lost some of its authority. "You look, well," she said. "I look well." Not a question. "The paper you had Judge Arment sign is based on a finding of unsound mind and abandonment of property. The light has been in operation for 6 weeks. I have 3 captains' attestations in this tower, signed and dated. Also written to the shipping company directly, and they have received my letter." A pause, 1 beat, just long enough to land. You should talk to your lawyers again before you come out here with papers." He stared at her. I kept my eyes on my harness. After a while he said, "Tight, who told you about?" "It doesn't matter who told me," she said. "I know. And now the shipping company knows. And the captains know. And Mr. Crow stands still has been here through all of it, and he has eyes, and presumably a memory." She looked at me then, briefly, one precise look. Mence looked at me again. "Different calculation now. This isn't over," he said. "No," Clara said, "it isn't. You should do the arithmetic before you come back." He left, both men with him. I watched them go up the path toward the shore and kept my face quiet. When they were gone, I set down the harness. Clara was still standing in the doorway. She was breathing carefully, the way you breathe after something hard when you don't want anyone to see it. Hard. "You didn't have to stay," she said, when he came. "I wasn't going anywhere," I said. She looked at me for a moment. Then she stepped outside and walked to where I was sitting and sat down on the rock next to me. Close. Not touching, but close. In the way that 2 people, who have spent enough time to get that close without thinking about it. She looked out. The water. 3 captains came, she said. "Did I tell you?" "You told me," I said. "They came because the light was on, and the rocks were clear." She was quiet. "They asked who I was. I told them. They wrote it down." A pause. "That was the first time someone wrote my name down in connection with this light. I didn't say anything." "Hargrove's light, they call it," she said. "His name. He was here 4 years. I've been here 6. She said it without bitterness, which was more unsettling than bitterness would have been. Just a fact she had catalogued. "It'll be Hargrove's light for a while yet," I said. "That's how it goes." "I know," she said. "That doesn't mean what you did wasn't what you did," I said. She looked at me. "I know that too," she said. Now, the winter settled in hard. I stayed. I want to be careful about how I tell this part, because I am aware that a man can make himself the hero of a story by arranging its pieces a certain, and I have no interest in that. What I can say plainly is this. There were things I did, and things she did, and things we did together, and none of it had a neat shape. I sent for some tools and materials, and we rebuilt the seal on the lamp housing that had been leaking salt air into the mechanism. That was 2 days of work, cold work, up on the gallery in the wind, and we did it side by side, and neither of us talked much, and we did it right. I brought firewood down from the hills, which is not a fast process, and she organized the stacking of it with the same precision she applied to the mechanisms. Nothing wasted. Everything counted. When the worst storms came through in December, she was the one who kept the light burning through 2 consecutive nights without sleep, and I kept the fire going below, and brought food up, and watched her work, and understood something about her that I don't have a simple word for. Something about the difference between a person doing a job and a person doing the thing they were made for. There was an evening, sometime in January, when the storm had eased and we were in the keeper's house at the base. She had been sleeping there for weeks by then. The tower was habitable once it was warm enough, and she had made something to eat, and we were sitting at the small table, and the lamp was lit, and outside the wind was going, but not badly. And she said, out of a long quiet, "I want to tell you something." I waited. "When I was up there," she said, meaning the lamp room, before, meaning those weeks alone and locked, I had started to believe them. Not all at once, just a little more, every day. She looked at her hands. That's the thing no one tells you about being told you're mad. It doesn't just happen. It's gradual. Every day you're alone with it and no one contradicts it, and you start to think, maybe they can see something I can't. Maybe the fact that I can't see it is the proof. She paused. I wasn't mad, but I was getting there. I listened. You sat on that step, she said, day after day. You didn't argue with me about it. You didn't reassure me about it. You just sat there and treated me like a person who could make decisions, like I was real. She looked up. That's what I needed. Not rescue. Just you sitting there, being sure I was real. I thought about what she said for a while. My wife did that for me once, I said, long time ago. A different kind of stuck. She sat with me until I remembered which direction was out. Clara looked at me steadily. She sounds like she was a good woman, she said. She was, I said. Best person I knew. Clara nodded. A quiet moment. I think, she said carefully, that you've been alone long enough. That's not advice and it's not a judgment. I just think it's true. I looked at her. She met my eyes without flinching, which was a thing about her I had noticed early, that she did not look away from things to be polite. Probably, I said. That was all. We didn't talk about it anymore that night. But something had been said that was real, and we both knew it. The brothers' lawyers withdrew the petition in February. I was never entirely sure what happened. Whether the captain attestations were decisive, or the shipping company's letters, or whether Mence had looked at the arithmetic as Clara had told him to, and found it unfavorable. Maybe all of it. Fenn sent word out to the point with the news, and Clara read the letter twice, and folded it, and put it in the pocket of her coat, and went up to check on the mechanism. I followed her up. She was at the lamp, running her hand along the housing, checking, the way she always did, looking for the small thing that might become a problem. It's done, I said. Yes, she said. How do you feel? She thought about it. Like I can breathe in a direction I forgot existed. A pause. Like whatever comes next is mine to decide. She looked at me. That's not nothing. No, I said. It's not. She turned back to the mechanism for a moment, then turned back to me. She was lit from below by the lamp, and the light made her face very clear. She said, I want to ask you something. You can say no. I waited. Stay, she said. Not because you're needed for the legal situation. Not because I can't manage alone, because I can. Because I want you here. She held my gaze. I know what you're going back to. I know you have people and a life on the plateau. I'm not asking you to give that up. Stay for now. See what this is. I looked at her for a while. I was going to ask you the same thing, I said. Just hadn't worked out the words. Something moved through her face. Relief, maybe, but bigger than that. The relief of a person who took a real risk and found solid ground on the other side. She reached out and took my hand. Not tentative. Deliberate, the way she did everything. Her hand was rough from the work, cold at the fingers from the lamp room air. And she held mine with a firmness that had nothing shy in it, nothing performing. Just a woman who had made up her mind and was letting me know. I held her hand. Outside the lamp room windows, the Pacific moved in the dark, the sound of it constant and old, the way it had moved before any of this, and would move after. Below on the rocks, the tide was coming in. Somewhere out past the reef, a ship was following the light home. We stood there in that small, bright room, above all that water, and I was a man who had come to lift a bar on a door, and had stayed because something was worth staying for. And I felt, first time in 2 years, like the direction I was pointing was the right one. Her hand didn't let go. Mine didn't either. By spring, the light was well known on the coast. 3 shipping companies had listed it by name in their navigation records, and the name they used was Hargrove Light. But below it, in smaller letters, in the handwriting of men who had come to know her, was the name Clara. Just that. The captains knew. I rode up to the plateau in April to see my son and my people, and to settle some things, and when I rode back down to the coast in May, I could see the lighthouse from a long way off, the white tower on the point, and I knew the light would be clean, and the mechanism would be right, and there would be a fire in the keeper's house, and food on the table. I knew because she was there. I tied my horse at the path, where I always tied him, and crossed the rock on foot with the tide low, and when I came around the base, she was on the gallery above, looking out at the water, and she heard me and looked down, and she did not smile in a big way. She was not a woman who did things in big ways, but something in her face changed in the way a fire changes, when you add wood to it. I went in and started climbing the stairs. I have been climbing those stairs ever since.